Welcome to Empowerment in Illness, the podcast dedicated to empowering, educating, and connecting individuals facing the daily challenges of chronic illnesses and autoimmune diseases. I'm Gwen, your host. Today, we're taking a reflective journey through Season 4, highlighting each episode and the valuable insights we've gained. Let's get started. Episode 1 and 2, Finding the Way in Your Autoimmune Journey. We begin the season with Dr. Darla Booth, a functional clinician who emphasized the importance of identifying the root cause of autoimmune conditions. Dr. Booth encouraged us to pay close attention to our bodies and heed early warning signs. She highlighted how certain foods, such as nightshades, can adversely affect individuals with autoimmune diseases, underscoring the need for personalized dietary choices. Take a listen.
So what would be your approach for someone like me?
So the first thing I would think about is I usually approach food first, and I want to know what food you're eating, what food you're not eating. Do you find that there's a trigger? Do you not? A free way of doing this, of course, is to hop on an AIP diet, right? Where you're an autoimmune paleo diet, where you're off of a lot of things, right? You're pretty specifically just meat and some veggies and not nightshades and not nuts and seeds and no gluten, no dairy. Just trying to do that for a few weeks and see, does that make a difference for me? Does that make me feel better? On that same topic, I can do a panel on someone through a company called Cyrex, and they're going to do a blood test to say, what foods are reacting, and I'm going to be looking at kind of my top 25. Really, the top 5 are pretty much gluten, dairy, corn, soy, and eggs that tend to pop up on a lot of autoimmune people, and I'm going to be looking for leaky gut. Has this been going on long enough that your gut is inflamed enough that your gut barrier isn't as intact and solid as it should be? So that's a big area that I look at first, which is food.
Episode 3, Silent Struggle. In Silent Struggle, we shed light on the often unseen challenges faced by those with invisible illnesses. This episode delved into the emotional and psychological impact of living with conditions that aren't outwardly apparent, discussing the importance of empathy, understanding, and effective communication in supporting individuals whose struggles may not be immediately visible. People with chronic illnesses deal with depression, anxiety, grief, and loneliness. Let's review. Depression. It's such a heavy word, isn't it? And when you live with a chronic illness, it's not just something you experience in fleeting moments. It can become a constant, unwelcome companion. I want to talk about what depression feels like when you're living with a condition that just doesn't go away. It's not just sadness. It's not just feeling down. It's this unshakable heaviness that seeps into every corner of your life. Anxiety. It's that gnawing sensation in the pit of your stomach, that racing heartbeat you can't control, that constant sense of dread you can't explain. For so many of us living with chronic illness, anxiety isn't just occasional. It's a constant shadow. Is waking up every morning wondering, what is my body going to do to me today? Grief. It's not a word we often associate with chronic illness, but it should be. Grief is such a deep part of this experience, and yet so few people talk about it. When most people hear the word grief, they think of losing a loved one. And while that's true, grief is so much more than that. For those of us living with chronic illness, grief is about losing part of ourselves. It's grieving the person you were before your diagnosis. The person who could stay out late with friends, who didn't have to check their symptoms or energy level before making plans. It's mourning the dreams you had for your life, the career you worked so hard for, the adventures you thought you'd take, the future you imagined. Let's talk about loneliness. It's a feeling that creeps in quietly and settles deep inside you, especially when you're living with a chronic illness. Loneliness isn't just about being alone. In fact, You could be surrounded by people, family, friends, coworkers, and still feel utterly isolated. Why? Because chronic illness creates a barrier that's hard for others to understand. What makes loneliness even harder is how it feeds into everything else. It amplifies the depression, it heightens the anxiety, it compounds the grief. Living with a chronic illness or autoimmune disease is not just a physical battle, it's an emotional and mental one too. Episode 4, BB's Journey. BB shared her inspiring story of managing Lyme disease through holistic approaches. She detailed her path to diagnosis, the setbacks encountered, and the alternative therapies that empowered her to regain control over her health. BB's experience offers hope and practical insights for others navigating similar health challenges. Take a listen.
I was moving so fast at life, and all that mattered to me was how much money was I making? Did I have my dream home? And I wasn't really taking a look at life. I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a passion back then. And going through that spiritual journey for me really helped me heal in a way that I didn't expect. It gave me the fatigue started going away. The depression started going away. One thing that you face with, or I had neurological Lyme, so I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. I really had the depression. My brain wasn't mine anymore. Going through the spiritual healing really helped with the depression, helped my purpose. I made it through the spiritual part, and then there was this other part of healing that everyone's told me about for years, but I needed to go through my self-love healing. Or I did not know myself, and I didn't know really what I enjoyed. So I had lived in the beach in South Carolina, and I packed all my things up. I put them in storage, and I walked across Portugal and Spain and the Camino. And that taught me that I can make it through this life with a lot less than what I thought that I needed.
Episode 5, Navigating the Seasons and Chronic Illness. This episode focuses on how seasonal changes can influence chronic illness symptoms. We provided strategies for managing flare-ups associated with different weather conditions, including tips on adjusting routines, utilizing appropriate therapies, and maintaining mental well-being throughout the year. This episode was created to remind us that the holidays don't have to look a certain way to be meaningful. Whether we're surrounded by loved ones or spending the season quietly, we have the power to create moments of peace and joy in our own way. Episode 6, Jen's Journey. Jen opened up about her experiences with fibromyalgia and the uncertainty of awaiting a potential multiple sclerosis diagnosis. She discussed the emotional toll of living with chronic pain and the complexities of navigating the healthcare system. Jen's story highlights the resilience required to cope with ongoing health uncertainties. Take a listen.
They did the panel blood work and everything came back normal, including my RA titer, and which stunned me. And they said, I don't think you've ever had RA. So I had to go through the whole battery of things, ruling out everything. And at that point in time, I got my fibromyalgia diagnosis because, as everybody knows, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. When nothing else fits, that must be what it is. It's fibromyalgia. And I started receiving treatment for that probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I've been living with that ever since. Where I'm at right now is I'm at a point in time where my fibro symptoms are pretty steady. I have pain every day. I manage with my pain every day. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm able to work a full-time job. But I am starting to experience some neurological symptoms that are a little bit worrisome. I'm starting to experience some numbness in my extremities, and I'm experiencing tremors. I'm experiencing some cognitive things like brain fog. And my doctor said that he would like me to go through testing again, specifically with a neurologist.
Jill, how do you feel about the possibility of multiple sclerosis?
I'm scared, if I'm being completely honest with you. It's a huge unknown. I personally am a planner, and I like to know what's happening next. And the unknown is a little scary for me. But that being said, I knew when I was diagnosed with fibro, maybe not as soon as I was diagnosed, but after I did a lot of research, I assumed that there was going to be another diagnosis coming at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of fibro sufferers are in the same boat. Like I said at the beginning, this is a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that, they're excluding other autoimmune things that may be happening. Fibro itself isn't considered an autoimmune disease, but very often people who get diagnosed with fibro then end up being diagnosed with lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or one of many other conditions, be it neurological or autoimmune.
We explored the therapeutic powers of sharing personal narratives in episode 7, Healing Through Stories. This episode emphasized how connecting with others who have similar conditions can foster a sense of community, reduce feelings of isolation, and promote emotional healing. Check it out. Let's dive into something truly inspiring today: the power of storytelling. When I say storytelling, what comes to mind? Maybe you think of books, movies, or even bedtime stories you heard as a kid. But storytelling is so much more than that. It's how we make sense of our experiences, how we connect with others, and how we create change in the world around us. When you're living with a chronic illness or an autoimmune disease, your story becomes a big part of who you are. The ups, the downs, the triumphs, and the struggles. It's all part of this incredible journey. And sharing that journey, that's where the magic happens. Storytelling has this amazing ability to transform lives, not just for the person telling the story, but also for the people hearing it. It can educate, it can inspire, and it can heal. Kicking off our first series on living with autoimmune diseases and chronic pain, the premiere episode focused on understanding rare autoimmune diseases. We discussed several uncommon conditions, shedding light on their symptoms, diagnostic challenges, and available treatment options, aiming to raise awareness and provide valuable information to those affected. Let's review. What makes an autoimmune disease rare? A condition is considered rare when it affects fewer than 200,000 people in the United States. For those living with rare autoimmune diseases, the journey can feel even more isolating because those conditions are often misunderstood, even by doctors. Even if only a few people have heard of your diagnosis, it doesn't mean your struggles are small. It just means we need to amplify your story. For example, have you heard of scleroderma? It's a condition that causes the skin and connective tissues to harden. Or myasthenia gravis, which affects the communication between nerves and the muscles, leading to muscle weakness. Then there's dermatomyositis, which can cause muscle inflammation and a distinct skin rash. How about ankylosing spondylitis, or AS? It primarily affects the spine, causing inflammation that leads to chronic pain and stiffness. Or hidradenitis suppurativa, HS, which causes painful lumps to form under the skin, usually in areas like the armpits, groin, or under the breast. And let's not forget Goodpasture syndrome, a rare autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks the lung and kidneys simultaneously. It sounds overwhelming, and it is. These names might be unfamiliar to many, but for those who live with them, they're a daily reality. Episode 9, Heather's Journey. Heather shared her experience with HS, a lesser known autoimmune disease. She recounted her struggles with misdiagnosis, the physical and emotional impact of HS, and her journey toward effective management. Heather's story brings attention to a condition that deserves greater awareness and understanding. Take a listen. Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so HS is an autoimmune disorder, which a lot of research has not gone into it yet because it is very rare. It's roughly about 1% of the population that deals with this. And I actually think from talking to people, it's higher that it just goes unreported, because doctors don't know what it is. And so they don't report it as that because they're not familiar with it. But it creates boils, abscesses under the skin that are extremely painful. And then they get to a point where they drain, which that comes with embarrassment of the draining and having to use bandages. And for some people, it can carry a smell with it.
Oh, okay.
So all those things. And mine started in my waistline. And then I started having it under my breast and then on my thighs. But it can be in other places too, under the arms, in the groin area, and then as it progresses, these abscesses will tunnel under the skin. Every one of them leaves a scar. They are recurrent. They keep coming back.
What are some of the things you do to manage it, on a typical day?
Well, before I actually saw a doctor and got treatment, it was just a matter of when they would pop up, I would put a Band-Aid over it so it wouldn't rub against my clothing and just kind of dealt with it. And then when it would drain, bandage it, clean it, and just go from there. Listening to your podcast, I can't thank you enough for your episode from last week. I really cannot tell you what it meant to me of the things that you said on there. I just felt seen and heard completely. And it's what made me want to do this, to help spread awareness and help someone else who is dealing with this, who doesn't know where to go for help.
Episode 10, Parenting with a Chronic Illness. Balancing parenthood with chronic illness was the focus of this episode. We discussed strategies for managing parenting responsibilities while prioritizing health, including open communication with children, seeking support networks, and implementing self-care routines to maintain overall well-being. Let's review. Let's start with the emotional side of things because, let's face it, chronic illness is as much about mental health as it is about physical health. As parents, we often carry a lot of guilt. Maybe you've missed a soccer game or a school play because you were too sick to go. Maybe you worry that your child has to grow up faster because they've had to learn empathy and independence earlier than their peers. It's okay to feel these things. But it's also important to challenge that guilt and recognize the love and effort you put into parenting every single day. Acknowledging your feelings without letting them consume you is a key part of an emotional resilience. Let's give ourselves permission to let go of guilt. You're doing your best, and that is what matters. Chronic illness doesn't make you a bad parent. In fact, it can teach your children some incredible lessons about resilience, adaptability, and compassion. They're seeing you show up every single day in whatever way you can, and that's inspiring. Remember, they don't need perfection. They need your presence and your love. Episode 11, Navigating Relationships and Intimacy. This episode addressed the complexities of maintaining relationships and intimacy while living with a chronic illness. We offer guidance on communicating effectively with partners, setting boundaries, and finding ways to nurture emotional and physical connections despite health related challenges. Let's review. Let's start with the foundation: how chronic illness changes relationships. Whether it's family, friendships, or romantic partners, illness shifts dynamics in ways we don't always anticipate. And it's okay to admit that these changes are challenging. It's about recognizing those changes and learning how to navigate them with clarity, self compassion, and the understanding that relationships evolve. One of the first things people notice about being diagnosed with a chronic illness is how much their role in relationships changes. Maybe you used to be the one who took care of others, but now you're the one needing support. That can be a tough pill to swallow. Or maybe you're in a romantic relationship where you and your partner were equals, but now they've taken on caregiving role. It's natural for this to create tension, even when both people have the best intentions. Episode 12, Razel's Journey. Razel courageously shared her battle with multiple illnesses and conditions, detailing the compounded challenges of managing coexisting health issues. Her narrative highlights the importance of comprehensive care, self-advocacy, and the strength required to persevere through multifaceted health struggles. If you're looking for a story of hope and resilience, this one is for you. Take a listen.
My name is Razel. I'm 24 years old. I lived in Israel. I was born there. I lived there for the first year of my life. And when I was less than 24 hours old, the doctors had to do a lumbar puncture to determine what was the cause of my fever from birth. And when they were doing the lumbar puncture, they mistakenly hit a nerve, and you can say they messed up. I don't like to look at it that way. I like to look at it as God maneuvered their hand in a way which caused me to have an incomplete spinal cord injury. So from day one, I've been battling medical challenges with an immune deficiency, and then from when I was less than 24 hours old, an incomplete spinal cord injury. I was constantly getting sick as a child. I was always out of school, which led to being bullied, feeling different, and just, not feeling a part of my age group. Towards the end of June of 2021, I received my second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine. COVID more often than, everybody else. I had gotten COVID twice. Little did I know this was going to be the most devastating thing that I would ever do to my body. Within 24 hours of getting the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, my body went absolutely crazy. I started experiencing symptoms of autoimmune encephalitis. At that point, I didn't know that it was autoimmune encephalitis. It took until November of 2021, so a couple of months later, until I was diagnosed. From there, things have just gone what most people would call downhill. In February of 2022, I was diagnosed with lupus. During this whole time, I was having a lot of muscle spasms, tingling in my legs. Thank God I was connected to a neurologist, and after a lot of testing and a lot of trying to figure out what was going on, I was diagnosed with CIDP. It's a rare muscular disease. That is how they best explain it is sisters to MS, multiple sclerosis. CIDP stands for chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy.
Episode 13, The Role of Caregivers. We turn our attention to caregivers, discussing their vital role in supporting those with chronic illnesses. This episode explored the emotional and physical demands placed on caregivers, emphasizes the need for their own self-care and the value of resources to assist them in their caregiving journey. Caregivers are the unsung heroes in many of our stories. They show up even when it's hard, even when they're exhausted, and even when no one else does. If you're a caregiver listening to this, please know that your role matters. You matter. We thank you for your service. If you're someone receiving care, take a moment today to express gratitude and support to the person who stands beside you. Closing the season in our first series, we examine the financial implications of living with a chronic illness. Topics include navigating insurance complexities, managing medical expenses, and seeking financial assistance programs. This episode aimed to provide practical advice to alleviate the economic strains associated with long-term health conditions. Let's review. Being sick is expensive. And I don't mean, I had to pay $20 for some cold medicine expensive. I mean thousands upon thousands of dollars for doctor visits, tests, medication, and treatment. If you live in a country where healthcare isn't fully covered, the bills stack up fast. And even if you have some form of coverage, the co-pays, deductibles, and out-of-pocket expenses can still be crushing. Think about it. When you're dealing with a chronic illness, you don't just go to the doctor once a year for a checkup. You have specialists, lab work, imaging, medication, physical therapy, sometimes hospital stays. And if you're lucky, you might even need medical equipment at home. None of that is cheap. How do we cope with these costs? Check out episode 14, The Financial Burden of Chronic Illness, to get the answer. As we conclude this special recap of Season 4 on empowerment and illness, we revisited a series of episodes that offered profound insights into managing chronic illnesses. From understanding the root causes of autoimmune conditions to exploring personal journeys of resilience, each episode provided valuable perspective and practical advice. Take care, everyone. Remember, you have the strength, the heart, and the support to continue your journey. Be safe.